Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the latest Ethos webinar. And we're very glad to have all of you join us tonight. This will be recorded, so you'll be able to go back and watch it again. It's on Zoom, obviously, broadcasted on Facebook Live. We're going to go about an hour, and tonight's topic, Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACEs, and its effects on student athletes. And we've got a really distinguished panel to talk about this tonight. And let's face it, everything we've done throughout this entire year with COVID and all the things overarching it, it's all relevant, isn't it? And I'm really excited about learning more about this tonight. So let me go ahead and introduce our panel, if that's okay. We have with us Dr. CARYN SAWLIS, and that's CARYN with a C. And we're really happy to have her with us tonight. 25 plus years in the classroom, an advocate for students, teachers, and parents, real life lessons from the classroom, and she pairs them with the latest in educational research, best practices to affect lasting change for children. And we're so glad to have her. I could go on and on with all of your things. So Dr. Sauce, hope you don't mind if I cut your bio short. Bottom line is, top of the line, best in the business. That's all we do here. Our second panelist is Mrs. Tina Robertson. And Tina serves as the Director of Clinical Training at Momentous Institute in Dallas, Texas, focused on building and repairing social, emotional health of children and families in her role. In the families. In her role, she's also a lead trainer and project director responsible for elevating work that happens at the intersection of mental health and education and addressing systemic inequities that adversely impact one's capacity to achieve momentous outcomes. In other words, we're excited and ecstatic to have you here and help us out, Tina. Appreciate that very much. Also on our panel is someone we've had before. We're bringing him back, a former student athlete at the University of Washington in Portland State, Mr. Isaiah Woods. Glad to have you here. He's fought through some technical difficulties to be here. And of course, the man himself, the man who runs Ethos, the man who sets up all these things for us and is an expert on so many different things. And his godson hit a home run just the other night playing Major League Baseball. And of course, that's Mr. Michael Davis. So happy to have everyone here. Glad that all of you are joining us for this. Let's get right to it because we mentioned ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. Let's get right to this and talk about them because before we came on, we were saying we need to make some of this positive. So Tina, I think you were talking about that. Please introduce ACEs and where we're going in terms of trying to be positive about what we're discussing tonight.
Yeah, so thank you. I want to thank Ethos for having me. And what a great topic to talk about. It's something that I live with every day. And so I know it's important for us to get this information out, to raise awareness, to really help destigmatize this conversation around adverse experiences and the resulting outcomes that can happen because of that. The reason why we talk about this from a frame of looking at it in a positive lens is because although we want to understand the basis of how adverse experiences happen through social context that create these environments where risk factors thrive, we also know that they are preventable. And so that's important to say first. And they're also treatable. And so we really want to convey that in the conversation tonight, that as we have this conversation that can hit on some really difficult things to say and to hear, we just want to remind everyone that's listening that this is treatable and it's preventable. So looking forward to having the rest of the conversation about this. And if you want me to expand more on the ACEs, I'm happy to do that. I'd love to share that with Dr. Saulis because I know she's got really strong background with that, but happy to share a little bit more if I'm asked.
Well, yeah, you are going to be asked, and thank you for teeing it up that way. Let's pass it over to Dr. Saulis. Dr. Saulis, let's go ahead and bring up what Tina just talked about. What are ACEs? And give us a great definition for people to understand it, because you know as well as anyone, so often we'll tell you what's bothering us and not have the proper term, but we're describing ACEs.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I love the fact that Tina added in that positive aspect to it, because ACEs are not, it's what's going on right now, but it's not your destiny. We have the ability to change it. And it was interesting because I talked to Lisa earlier this morning, and I said, we have spent all of our energy and all of our resources to find a vaccine for COVID, and we have. I'm hoping today that we can come up with a vaccine for ACEs. And that's really mainly relationships. We know that adverse childhood experiences focuses on three main components, and that's abuse, household dysfunction, and neglect. But if we can train our parents, if we can train our educators, if we can train our student athletes on this is what's happened to me, that we can then say, okay, this is going on inside my body. And then what can we do to mitigate it? And Ethos is doing that right now. They are creating relationships. And that's the biggest thing to mitigate, to vaccine, if you will, adverse childhood experiences. That caring, connecting adult to help someone who is dealing with an armor of shame of what has happened to them, and to be able to take it off and go, me too. I am here for you. Let's come up with a life plan. Let's help you come up with a way to self-regulate and to have a life path, if you will, to change your story.
Michael, you just heard all that. And with what you're doing and with your program, you're seeing people come in who need that vaccine.
Yeah, I do.
What are you seeing? How are you administering that through your programs?
So I think it boils down, like Dr. SAWLIS talked about, it's connection points, and it's putting a life plan together, which we call a legacy plan. And you have to understand your identity. You have to understand your purpose and value and your goal setting. You have to have people around you that say, I love you. I understand where you're coming from. You're not by yourself. And that comes in the way of the village. And it takes a village to raise our kids. So none of us can do this by ourselves. We all go through, trauma and issues. But to have a way to work through it, is super, super important. I remember in one of our last webinars, a student athlete dies twice. We talked about that with Dr. Brooks, and how a student athlete will die after their career is over. And then obviously die again, be called the glory based on, going home finally. But how do you go through and process that trauma of a kid not being able to play ball because they live in California and the state law said, hey, you can't play, or I'm just not good enough anymore, or whatever that trauma is. Student athletes have a different lens in addition to other folks that have trauma. But it's all trauma. It's all something, again, like Tina said, can be treatable by way of having a village of support and just having a life plan, understanding your identity and understanding that there's life after sports, that's not what you're meant to do is only play ball. You're meant to do so many other things beyond that. But if you don't have that type of understanding around you or that exposure to what that may look like, then you're going to struggle. And I think by having just structure around a life plan and a village that loves you is what we try to do at Ethos.
Isaiah Woods, you're a former student athlete. And, for people on the outside looking at you, you're the world by the tail. You're at the University of Washington. You're in the Pac-12. You're playing as a freshman in college football, one of the best conferences in the country. You're getting it done. Yet you felt pressure. You felt, some aces. You had some things going on there, and you had to battle your way through. Your story is special, and we can find it out there. But this is what Michael's talking about. You're that student athlete that I think that he's referring to. Can you illuminate a few more things for us? Bring it out for us.
Yeah, most definitely. And just like Mike said, having a village and just knowing what it is before it happens is so much easier, because I remember when I was going through my thing, I kind of had to figure out what I was going through first. And that I felt like that took away from time, that made things worse because I didn't know these feelings, or I didn't know where I come from. I didn't know what do you do? You know what I mean? I'm not supposed to feel like this. That's kind of how I was taught. So like Mike said, having that system there and people that already know what you're going to go through and what's going to happen is like almost 50% of the battle, just because you already have things set up.
You know, Tina and Dr. Sauls, I'm going to have you guys tag team this one, okay? Because here's where I'm going with it. Isaiah is one of the top players in the country. He gets a scholarship to go play football. The University of Washington, perennial contender for the Pac-12 championship, but want to, you know, potentially playing for national titles, going to the Rose Bowl, whole deal. All of us are watching him and saying, what do you mean you've got problems? How can you have problems? How can this thing affect you?
Right.
And he really, where does he, as he said, where do I go with something like this? Because we all think he's got it figured out. So Tina, Dr. SAWLIS, where does his village come from? How do you find that village if you're in Isaiah's situation? Tina, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so the first thing I want to say about ACEs is that it is absolutely, completely prevalent, and it does not discriminate by socioeconomic status or race or ethnicity. The actual study was done in the late 90s with about 17,000 plus healthcare members that were mostly white, mostly middle class, mostly college educated. And what the study revealed was that over 60% of those respondents said that they had at least one ACEs out of the scale of 10. And about 25% or more said there were 3 or more. And so once you start getting up to 4 to 6, you're really looking at some concerning numbers. So it's important to note that when we think about looking at someone like Isaiah or anybody else that we watch, anybody that played Monday night for Baylor or for Gonzaga, that there's the high likelihood that somebody's experiencing ACEs there. The study proved that up. So that's the first thing that we look at. And I love the fact that Isaiah indicated that if he had known more. So that's why this webinar is so important and opportunities to get the word out, because the more that we are aware of what this study talks about, the more that we can look at our life through that lens of, I'm not the only person experiencing this. There are other people who have gone through it. There are people who have had experiences. They've had significant ACEs, and yet they've been able to turn their lives around because of those protective factors, because of the village, because of programs like Ethos, because of the legacy plan, because of community. So where do we find that community? We find it in programs like this. We find it within our family units, where we understand the importance of families truly coming together and building what we call protective factors, because the protective factors are what mitigate the risk factors. There are lots of risk factors that elevate the potential for ACEs to occur. But on the other side of that, there are lots of opportunities that families have, that communities have, and that schools in particular have to really help to bring in those factors that help kids feel like they belong, feel like they're supported. Mike mentioned feel like that they're loved, and most importantly, because trauma takes away safety, that's the first thing that we go for, is to create an environment where people feel safe to be who they are, to grow, to work through those issues that have developed as a result of ACEs.
Dr. SAWLIS?
I love that so much, that what Tina had said. And I also want to add in another little nugget, is that a trauma for me may be not a trauma for you. And that, so a paper cut for me may be a gaping wound for somebody else. And that trauma can be any bad thing. We need to change our mindset with that. And so we also need to educate what tolerable, toxic, and positive stress is. Positive stress. I'm having to prepare for a talk today with these magnificent panel members. And then we need to talk about tolerable stress. Tolerable stress can be what we experienced in Texas, Snowmageddon, or a death in the family. But that toxic stress that comes in waves and waves and waves. And the difference between toxic stress and tolerable stress is that caring relationship. And so from an education point of view, I am hoping that we can have the conversations, because again, as Tina said, this seminal study of the adverse childhood experiences was in 1995 to 1997. It's 2021, and we are not doing a good enough job for preventative care. And so what can our student athletes do? This is where I'm hoping that when they go on to school, that their coaches are very cognizant of what trauma is. and that they may ask their teams, let's take this test. Let's talk about trauma. I know Tina and her Momentous Institute, they teach the brain at a very early age. Why are we not teaching our student athletes about the prefrontal cortex, talking about making good decisions and how that amygdala, that limbic system overrides everything? And when you have an amygdala that's not going to listen, because that's what it does, it's the fire alarm. What do we do to get it back online? And so how are we teaching our student athletes to understand possibly the window of tolerance? Where are you in the calm zone? When you're not in the calm zone, are you hypervigilant? Are you in that fight or flight? Or are you hypovigilant, where you are just calm or maybe be considered apathetic in the classroom? And so just naming these things. They say in the mental health field, if you name it, you can tame it. And I think that's one of our very first things that we all need to do in this village.
Got a terrific comment here from Pat Sweat to everyone that said PTSD for athletes, essentially what we're talking about, right? So in a lot of ways, Isaiah, very quickly, what years were you at the University of Washington, Portland State?
I was at University of Washington from 2015 to 2016, and then Portland was, I want to say 19 to 20, or maybe 18 to 19.
Okay, so you're fairly up to date, quote unquote. Michael, you and I are old, okay? So when we were playing ball, not to, and this is just time frame. If you walked in and said to your coach, I just don't know, there's whatever. You were just told to work harder, work out, get out of my office and the whole thing. As you're confronting that now, what Tina and Dr. SAWLIS have talked about, how are you having to reprogram and help people understand this better when we can name things and it's okay? Because I will guarantee for you and me, it was not okay.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, we had Coach Jay Hayes, my coach at Cal, and he talked about that. He would say, hey, if you got any kind of ailment or whatever, get over it, get back on the field, get to practice. I'm not trying to hear that. I look at it as like an excuse, like you're trying to get out of practice. There's nothing wrong with you. Get back out there. And so I think, what Dr. SAWLIS was talking about, and she gave me some homework before this whole thing actually took place, and I took my ACE score and everything else. But what I walked away with was knowing that I'm normal. I'm knowing that I do have trauma like anybody else, and then I can call it. But you have to work through what you just said, Charles, this whole element of being labeled as an athlete that cannot be broken. You cannot be vulnerable. This is what it is. And if you are, you're weak. And so in being in this weak state and being this competitor, right, you can't coexist both sides of it. And I think what Dr. SAWLIS and Tina are talking about is that you can, and it's okay to have that conversation. It's okay to label it. It's okay to be in the safe haven to have these conversations with people that care about you. And that's what Jay Hayes did for me, and say, hey, we can have these conversations. And so that's where we talk about that alignment in the village, that the parents, the coaches, the athletes have to be in alignment with all these things that we're talking about. Because when you don't have that alignment, then you're going to have these issues where this kid has to make a decision. Do I go left? Do I go right? And have to find my own solution. And a lot of times they can't by themselves. And so we have to find an alignment together, in this process. Again, as coaches, as parents, as student athletes, everybody involved. I mean, the counselors, everybody has to have their piece in this process.
Dr. SAWLIS and Tina Robertson, I love to tag team both of you because we get such great viewpoints from you. And I'm going to ask Dr. SAWLIS to start on this one. Number one, what is an ACE score?
An ACE score is a number that after taking the test, if you will, there's 10 questions. And for whatever question you get correct, that is an ACE. So I don't want to activate anybody on this panel, but I'll give one. If you were to ask the question, is your family divorced? If you answer yes, that's one ACE. And so as Tina had talked about, the more ACEs you have, the more likelihood you could be at risk for heart disease, for mental illness, for risky behavior. For me as an educator, 4 or more ACEs, you are 7 times more likely to be in prison. 4 more ACEs, 6 more ACEs, your life expectancy could be curtailed by 20 years. So to go back to that question, an ACE is referred to one of the questions. After they took 100 of them, they broke them down to 10. And so whatever answer you answered correctly or answered yes, whether that was, did you have a family member, or did you have a parental member incarcerated? If you answered yes, that's another ACE.
Ms. Robertson, I want to follow up on that because I think that when we hear this, the first thing we think of naturally, mental health. But Dr. SAWLIS has talked about life expectancy, heart disease, other things as being outcomes of that. Can you talk to us about what the connector, obviously there's a connection, but that's, I don't know that that's something we leap to right away. We talk about the head. I don't know that we're thinking about the rest of us.
Yeah, so what's interesting about the ACE study, Dr. Vince Folletti partnered with Dr. Robert Anda. Anda was with CDC. Folletti was doing his thing. He started out doing an obesity study with some women. And as they got into the narrative of their lifestyle and their history, there was a common thread of abuse. And out of this obesity study, which really he was looking at a health outcome. So it was almost looking at the end in mind and then travel back to find out what caused this symptom of health. And so that's how the ACE study evolved. So we know that physical health is an indicator that something is happening in the body that is causing a health outcome. I want to say that mental health is part of health. And that's one of the ways that we destigmatize talking about mental health. It is part of physical health. And physical health is part of mental health. They work together. Why? Because of the neurobiology. So we have a brain-body connection, which is neuro and biology. They're connected. You can't separate them. You can't take your brain and leave it at home and say, I'm just going to do the body thing today. So we say to kids in school, you're bringing the brain and the body together. So when we talk with teachers about understanding ACEs, it's like we got to deal with the body to get into the brain area so it can learn. So when we think about health, we think about the fact that stress and trauma are housed in the body. So we have an HPA axis, which is hypothalamus pituitary adrenal system. And what happens when we are under adverse experiences or we're under stress or experiencing trauma, that system, that nervous system gets elevated. And if the threat passes, then our system should come back to a place of balance. So, after that football game and somebody, hits you and you might feel like you're injured, that stress pops up of, is this my career? So once your nervous system settles, you can get back to a baseline and go on and do what you do. But the problem is when that nervous system stays elevated, ongoing, every day, every night, because that HPA system is pushing cortisol, the stress hormone in your system, and that is coursing throughout your body, and that creates problems with your immune system. It causes suppression there. So now you have these physical health issues that are happening, but then you also have the neurobiology connection, right? So now you've got these mental health issues that can develop as well. And so that's why one of the primary strategies for addressing trauma and dealing with ACEs is to calm the nervous system. Every client I have in therapy, whether they are 10 or 100, we always start with stabilizing the nervous system so that we can begin to do the work to look at the other factors and features, whether it's physical health or whatever quality of life that they're working toward. We start with that nervous system first.
Isaiah, when you were in your college days and you were seeking help, does this sound familiar? What they're talking about?
I think they're a lot more intelligent on the situation than the people I had to come in contact with. But a lot of the stuff they say makes sense. Like even just knowing the body, like Dr. SAWLIS said, like how it's your mind. If somebody would approach it to me that way, of okay, this is what's actually going on, that would have made it better for me to understand. Because I feel like when you're going through this, or when I was going through my depression and anxiety, it was kind of like they were just telling me, okay, let's talk about it. Let's talk about this. And it's like, okay, I feel good when I'm talking, but what is this really helping? So if I feel like if they taught you like, oh, this is your body, this is your brain, this is what happens when you feel this way, this is the signals it sends out, things like that, it'll be much easier for people to understand and just approach it also.
Well, Ms. Robertson started that conversation, Dr. SAWLIS. How do student athletes, how do athletes find a way to get past the ACEs and continue on their journey as student athletes?
For me?
Yes, Dr. SAWLIS.
I'm sorry. I was looking at both of them. I got so excited about answering the question. It was like, oh my goodness. For me, I think it's really teaching our youth, our adults, how to self-regulate. We teach babies how to self-soothe, the pacifier, the rocking, right? And then we grow up. And so how are we teaching our adults? So for me, and I noticed that someone put into the chat box PTSD.
Yeah.
So if we know that we possibly could have an athlete with PTS, we're getting rid of the D because it's not a disorder anymore. It's just a stress. We can teach them a butterfly method, and that has the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. So you could be doing the butterfly hug. It mimics EMDR. This may be something that we might want to teach our athletes how to do, or even to contact EMDR. You will always see me in the classroom or even in my neighborhood hall, my neighborhood, an Obermann sphere. We're teaching our adults, our youth, how to breathe. What about a box breathing, where you're breathing in for 4, holding for 4, exhaling for 4, holding for 4? They teach cadets at West Point how to do this breath before they go out. And so again, if we're teaching our athletes, if we're teaching our teachers, if we're teaching our coaches that mind-body systems, as Tina had talked about, that if we've got an overactivated sympathetic nervous system, how does that parasympathetic nervous system come into play? And how are we calming down using the vagus nerve? Breathing is one of the most, we're given the gift of breath, and yet we forget about it because many of us, like myself, we breathe like this. We're not breathing right. And so how are we doing this? Because as Isaiah said so eloquently, he was never told, buck up, get over it. Men don't cry, pull up your bootstraps. But what happens if you're not living in Texas and you don't own a pair of boots? So again, what are we doing? So again, I think teaching those self-regulation skills and really teaching and not shaming that I get activated when this happens. Okay, you're acknowledging it. So now let's find some way. Maybe it's movement, maybe it's yoga, maybe it's music, maybe it's reading, maybe it's journaling, maybe it's drawing. So again, a lot of these things that we could be teaching our student athletes when they're coming up with their plan, it's really a self-care plan. And a self-care plan is a lot different from Tina than it is for me, than it is for Isaiah and Michael.
And Sydney Smith has shared with us muscle relaxation techniques, which I think you're talking about. Very quickly, Dr. SAWLIS, EMDR, could you define that for us, please? Especially to someone I'm like Denzel in Philadelphia. I'm a 5-year-old. You got to explain this to me.
Eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It is a way where you are taking a traumatic event that may be at a level 10, and whether your therapist is using their finger or whether they're using electrodes, you're using that right hemisphere and left hemisphere sensation, and you're taking that moment from a 10 and putting it down to a 5 or a 4 or a 3 by whatever is activating you. For me, it would be white men. So if a white man came into the room, I typically would have gone, oh! But now, because I've gone through an EMDR moment, I could say, okay, I'm acknowledging this. I am now calm. I am safe. So again, it's reprogramming the brain. Tina, you may be able to help me out a little bit more.
Yeah, no, you hit it up completely. It's really a very, it's got about 30, 40 years of evidence behind, and usually it's used to process a single incident trauma. So for somebody who has complex trauma, meaning that they have multiple ACEs and they've had trauma over a lifetime. I think, okay, I'm sorry, I was talking.
We got you back.
The host muted me. Am I back on? Okay.
Oh, yeah, you're back.
Yeah, so EMDR is really very impactful for especially a single incident trauma. So you may have had complex trauma that has occurred over a course of a lifetime. If you've got 3 or 4 ACEs or more, that's probably complex trauma for you. But it is one of the most successful modalities that we have right now. There are people who get EMDR and they literally, somebody who might be a candidate for therapy for several months could shorten that, by months. They may be in for 6 months as opposed to, 2 years, 3 years because of this modality. It's amazing how just the eye movement, it unplugged something that was stuck within the brain and within the nervous system. So anyway, if you are someone who is interested in that, we can provide more information for you. There's plenty of stuff to read, videos you can watch on it, but it is an amazing modality.
Well, I tell you what, you both just unlocked something for me. Michael, I heard a coach tell his player, let your shoulders drop. And I was like, what is he talking about? Now I get it, right? Yeah. The relaxation. So Michael, I'm asking you now, point blank, even though we're in COVID time and we're going through all that, is this a time where you are seeing more and more youngsters come to you and Ethos and able to articulate and ask for that help? And I'm just guessing that us parents are the ones you're having to educate a little bit more and trying to have to work harder to get to come around.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. I mean, they're asking for things that they don't really know. They're not aware of, like Isaiah talked about. The issues are there. They feel a certain way. They're acting a certain way. But they have no idea about what's happening in their body and the different challenges and the trauma that they're going through, which can have these issues. And I really love what Dr. SAWLIS talked about and Tina talked about the breathing. It brings me to looking at the coach for the Lakers back in the day, Chicago, Phil Jackson. I mean, I remember him going through that stuff with his players, with Michael Jordan, his team, doing yoga and those things, getting them prepared mentally and breathing and visualizing. I think the visualization and breaking down how you see things happen before they actually happen can calm you down. The breathing and how you also, again, seeing the action before it happens all works to calm you down. So that was a great point, because I totally forgot about that. But to your point, Charles, I definitely, kids come in, knocking on the door, really confused, especially with this pandemic. And, looking at themselves in a different way and saying, am I weird? Am I normal? And then they're labeled, right? So academia has a way to label these kids based on how they look and how they act. And they don't even get into this conversation. They're like, oh, he's just this troublemaker. He comes from this place. This is what it is. And this is how I'm going to treat him. And you have an issue. And it's not anything about the mind, the body, and the soul and the spirit. It's you based on where you've lived. It's you because this is what your mom and dad did. It's you because of whatever the situation. It never gets to that conversation. So that kid internalizes all that even more so. So you never even get to the solution, because they've been labeled in academia to be this terrible person. And they're not. It's just a kid that's been through some things. And if you widen your breath and your focus and your lens to appreciate what this kid has been through, and then have tools in your toolbox to say, now let me address some things that this kid doesn't know, as opposed to just adding on to the issues, that's where I kind of see this conversation actually having some benefit.
Okay, so you hold there, Dr. SAWLIS, Tina Robertson, Michael. I want you guys to be prepared, because I'm going back to Isaiah. There's a question from Pat Sweat to everyone, and I think it's a great question. But I'm going to go in kind of in a reverse order on this. You ready? Isaiah, the question is, how would you help a student that is hesitant about talking to a professional about their issues? Because I can't imagine it was easy for you to finally do this. Can you walk us through your process pretty quickly here? And then I want to go back to our panel to be able to help answer that question from the opposite perspective.
Mm-hmm. So I saw in the chat, I think it was Dr. SAWLIS that said, give them information. I feel like that's the number one thing to do, just so they know that they have somebody to come to. But I know in my experience and just how I was feeling, it's on their own time. Whenever they feel ready to, whenever they want to talk, they will talk. It's just about letting them know that they have the support there and that it is there whenever they need it. But you definitely can't force somebody to talk about it. It's already an awkward situation, so that would just make it even more like awkward, I feel like.
So Tina, how would you get a youngster or someone who is hesitant about talking to a professional if they showed an opening to want to get there? How do you get them there to help them get more help?
Yeah, no, Isaiah said it perfectly. At some point it's their decision and time, but the way that we soften it up is that we empower them to make that decision, and we empower them through giving information and helping them learn about their brains and helping them understand what's happening in their neurobiology. Lots of times the fear of it is the stigma, one, but it's also potentially being labeled. So Michael talked about this earlier, is that these behaviors and these feelings can be overwhelming and scary when you don't know why they're happening or what they're attached to. And sometimes in our community settings and school settings, inadvertently, we know that teachers and principals have good intentions, but sometimes kids get labeled. And sometimes they are told they're bad and they get labeled, and that carries through. And so that creates a fear. They don't want to reach out. They don't want to talk to someone about what's happening. So that creates shame. It creates guilt, and that creates isolation and turning in. So we want to give information about who you are, what's happening to you. We also want to teach skills. So we want to empower through skills. So we talked about, Dr. SAWLIS talked about the breathing. So just being able to understand that you can manage what you're feeling, that you can name it to tame it, that you can chase the why might I have done that. So you begin to learn these skills that help you be self-aware, they help you to self-regulate, and those again give you efficacy and then they empower you. And then the last thing that I would say is the more that there is group involvement. So in a team setting, there's the opportunity for coaches to actually create an environment where you destigmatize the conversation on mental health. So you start off in a team meeting by going toward that. Like the next few meetings, we're going to be talking about our mental health. And you can use a sentence stem and just say, this week, we're just going to share one difficult emotion that we had. And that can happen in the team environment. So what then happens is that there's a safe space that's created in a group setting where everybody's getting the same information and everybody's getting to express, then I might feel more comfortable individually seeking out those services because I've had the softening and the opening up for me to be able to do that.
I'm going to get to Dr. SAWLIS and Michael here in just a second, but I want to acknowledge that we have another panelist who's been able to join us tonight. Tim Brown is here with us now. Tim, looks like, are you in your whip? Did you get a brand new ride? And I know you deeded your old one to me, but we'll talk about that. I'll get that pink slip later. But we appreciate you coming on here tonight.
My pleasure, guys. I apologize for being late. Had something to come up I had to take care of, but glad to be here.
Well, we appreciate it. We're going to get back to you in just a minute. Dr. SAWLIS, I know you want to continue on the track that Tina and Michael are on. And then I want to get to something that was posted on here from Dr. Connor. So go ahead, Dr. SAWLIS.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And so for me, I'm a restorative practices person. I love the fact that Tina said that everybody have a conversation. So creating that safe space in that environment where everyone is willing to talk. And I'm going to throw this one out. I'm feeling like we're family here, right? If we're very intentional and if we're very open and honest, we need to tell our student athletes that 1 in 5 adults have a mental health condition. 1 in 4 youth have a mental health condition. I'll be the first one. It looks like there's 21, 22 people here. I'm not a math person. I'm an English person. I'm number 1. I have a mental health condition. And so it looks like there should be 4 more of us in here. And so talking about that, it's more common. If you have not been through youth mental health first aid training, please do so, because they talk about the ALGE acronym, where you're assessing, you're listening non-judgmentally, you're giving reassurance and facts, those hope and facts. And so you're telling that student, here's some information, here's some facts, but then you encourage appropriate professional help. You also encourage appropriate self-help strategies. And I think that's really, and then you just keep going through that cycle over and over again until they're ready.
Michael, Dr. Connors posted for everyone that it can also be helpful when the culture of the team, as someone is on, exposes and normalizes professional support for athletes. This, however, is a cultural shift in sports. It certainly sounds like all of you are on that track right now. That sounds like what I'm hearing from this panel.
Absolutely. I think Dr. Connors is right on point. You have to normalize it. You have to, again, create that safe haven, that safe place to have that conversation. Like Isaiah talked about, you just got to empower them with knowledge to then allow the student athlete to say, when they're ready to come speak to you, they will. But you have to give them the ability to be empowered with knowledge to work through a safe place to say, okay, this is safe for me. It's a process they got to go through before they actually start to talk. But if you don't have that particular environment, you don't have that culture, you don't make that shift, you never get to these conversations. The kids never get the help. And so if coaches and just that professional society, but can actually put in the extra work to actually do this type of things for student athletes, I think they'll get a better reaction with the student athlete, a better product on the football field. It all comes down to dollars in the end of the day, right? How can I get this kid to perform better? That's how the coaches keeps his job. That's how they keep their contracts with the shoes. The TV contracts is based on how they perform. So they can start to translate these things from a mental and physical health, like Tina said, it's all health, and do that type of work to empower the student athletes to now take control over their lives with a safe haven to have these conversations. You're halfway home. So I think Dr. Connors is right on point.
Tim Brown, appreciate you being able to join us. Anything that you want to offer after what you've heard during the time that you've been with us, or anything on the topic to put on the table for us?
Boy, not really. I came in on the end of this, so I've been enjoying what I heard. But, the one thing I know about dealing with kids, my kids withstanding, is that, they definitely need room to be able to deal with whatever situation they're dealing with. I think sometimes we expect, I have a niece that we raised since the time she was 4 years old, and she's about as different as my kids as you can get. And it's frustrating us because she's had all the best of everything that our kids has had, but she chooses to do things that are totally against what we may want, or against everything that she's been raised to do. But, when you look back at her parents, she's doing the same thing her parents did, but she has no clue that, she's never even been with her parents for the most part. So it's amazing that she's almost 30 years old now, and she is just now coming around. After all these years of talking to her and trying to get her to understand, she finally sees it. Why? Because she wants to take a look at it now. And we were trying to force something on her that she wasn't ready to see. But now at almost 30 years old, she's at the point in her life where she realizes that, yeah, she could have made a couple better decisions. But so I think I heard somebody say that, you can't force kids into making these type of decisions and talk about things. And I've lived that. I lived that for almost 25 years now. And with somebody who we love and care for very dearly. And to watch her go through some of the things that she went through was hard to take. But at the same time, it was hers to go through, right? And now she's on the other side of it, and hopefully and prayerfully she'll do better going forward.
Is there such a thing? I'm asking the panel and whoever wants to take this to start, as counter ACEs?
Dr. SAWLIS, you are like dying to get in there. Go ahead. I'll come on behind you.
I don't know if I would call it counter ACEs. Again, I'm going to go back to my idea of vaccines. And so again, so how do we mitigate the ACEs? And so again, that's with relationships. That is with understanding, that is with education, and that is with knowledge. And so I love the fact that Mr. Brown talked about his relative who had been with him since the age of 4, but we have to know that the body keeps the score. And so for me, I was hit by a car at age 3. That's my first memory. And that translated into future medical conditions. And so just because that you have put that person in another environment, we need to remember that the body is still holding on to it. And that's why it's so important to deal with the body and the mind, as Tina said. Just so to go back to your original question, you know, how is there a way to meet, or for me, the relationships.
That actually, I think, is really such a good segue to this piece about positive childhood experiences. And so this is something recent that's emerged. I think a researcher out of Johns Hopkins actually implemented this instrument, but it basically is about relationships. And so there are a series of questions, much like the adverse childhood experiences. The positive childhood experiences are relational based, and they're all getting to creating safety, creating support, and creating belonging, because those are the 3, I guess you would say, the antidotes, the vaccine. Thank you, Dr. SAWLIS, for dealing with ACEs. And so there is actually a survey where you can check off how many positive childhood experiences are in your life. But that is actually a tool and an instrument that is so important for the adults in the system, because we are the co-regulators of student athletes, for the children in our lives. And so we have an opportunity to look at that particular survey and assessment to give us ideas of what it means to provide safety and support. The other thing I want to say very quickly, and then I'll wrap up, is that when we do give the ACE survey, it's important to also give the resilience survey as well. They go hand in hand, because what we want our kids to see, and I think Michael's talked about this before, and its programming is really about that, is we want them to identify the strengths alongside some of those challenges. So if I just look at my A score, I could easily get taken out of the game and start this shame spiraling and thinking I'm this bad person. And what happens with kids that deal with trauma, they internalize it. They believe that it's their fault. They believe they've done something to contribute to it. So we want them to see the resilience scale, the areas where they have strengths in their lives, and adults get to not only provide those positive childhood experiences, but we get to play up the strengths and we get to honor the resilience. And that's how we do some of that mitigation as well.
Can the resilience scale, and we have about 9 minutes left, so I'm going to try and get to it quickly here. Can the resilience scale, Tina Robertson and everyone else on the panel, help someone like me who says, I'm going to get the professional care I need, but like when I go to the doctor for a physical thing, at some point I expect to be cured and not have to see that doctor anymore? Am I going about that thinking the wrong way? Or is that something that is attainable and out there for people?
Well, your resilience is really one of your tools. It's part of how you manage what you're dealing with. There are some situations of trauma that are so traumatic and have been so complex over the course of a lifetime, someone may never get completely over, but they're getting through and they're able to manage and have a strong quality of life. And isn't that the case when you look at physical health issues? If you're diabetic, if you have high blood, with medication, with certain exercise, with doing what you're supposed to do, because most of the time people don't, sleeping right, sleeping appropriately, eating right, okay, put all that sugar down, put that steak down on Sunday. So if we do those things, we're able to manage these chronic illnesses. And it's the same thing when it comes to mental health. You are managing these chronic emotional occurrences that happen over a period of time, and people have had success doing that. I can sit here and say I'm one of those people that does that. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not, but I still am able to have a quality of life. So Dr. SAWLIS said this. There are plenty of people on here who have had mental health challenges. They're managing it daily because they're using the tools, they're building on their resilience, and they know that their brain is plastic. It can change and they don't have to stay the same.
Michael, want to follow up?
Yeah, that was beautiful. That was, I wanted to cry, man. That was, first thing that comes to mind is making sure our kids have a growth mindset. And that to me is kind of how I summarize that from the fixed mindset, hey, you know, where I am, I can't change it. That's where I am. I can't, because mom had this issue and dad had this issue. My brother had this issue. I'm going to have this issue. Because I've been labeled, I can't escape this label. I'm just going to be a dumb athlete when it's all said and done. No matter what I do and how I process, you know, life, that's how I'm going to be labeled. But I think in having a growth mindset and having that plan of action to be resilient, I think that is really hand in hand in making sure that kids can learn different skill sets and different ways to combat this issue when it's all said and done. So again, it's about empowerment, allowing to understand these kids, or i.e. student athletes, that what they have can be worked on, can be dealt with, they can improve it. There's things that they have to do to be accountable to what they've been through. But the fact that you know you've had certain things now gives you the advantage, right, to go and set this plan and carry it out. And having a village around you to support you in that process, and hopefully have the alignment with your coach and with your parents and with any other mentors that's in your life, you can actually do it. And so I think that's all the things that came out. And that's what we try to do here at Ethos. But yeah, I think that's really what came to mind when you guys were talking.
Isaiah, how about you and your journey? I mean, you've been, I consider, extremely courageous coming out and talking to us on multiple occasions about what you're going through, because I think I teed it up earlier. I do believe the normal person looks at you and goes, you got to be kidding me. You're playing ball Washington. Well, how can it be so bad? What's going on? But how are you in your journey and seeking to get to the end goals that you have for yourself?
Just, you know, taking everything day by day. You have your off days, you have your off weeks, but just staying ahead of everything, I feel like. And just knowing that, well, I guess I had to really accept, like, it's not going to go away. Like, I'll always have to deal with anxiety and depression, but it's just how you handle it, you know, and how you carry yourself. And like we talk about, just finding yourself and who you actually are. And I feel like after football, you really have to do that. And that helped me a lot, just realizing who Isaiah was, not who the football player was or who I was at UW or anything like that. So finding yourself and realizing who you are just makes you even more confident in yourself. And I feel like that helps with anxiety and depression, because that's all you're doing is doubting yourself during that.
Hey, real quick, I'm sorry, Charles.
No, go ahead.
Can you speak on Almost There real quick, what that is?
Oh yeah, Almost There. So Almost There is my my clothing brand, and it's more of like a movement or than a brand, I feel like, because Almost There is just a saying, like, everybody's almost there in whatever they're going through. You could be almost there to getting however much money you want or the lifestyle you want or getting through depression or anxiety. But it's just knowing that you're going to go through your ups and downs, you're going to go through your stuff, but you're almost there. Just to always remember that. So that's pretty much what that is.
Dr. SAWLIS, we're down to about 3 minutes, but there are two things that are sticking in my mind, and I want you to help us with this journey. I'm old enough to remember the Bob Newhart show when he was a psychiatrist, I believe. And he had like they always have the group meetings, and it was rooted in humor. But there was one episode where a Chicago Bear football player was in the group, and he was telling the group that I just don't want to go out there and bust heads on Sunday anymore. I just don't feel it. And someone in the group said, so why do you keep doing it? He said, because they pay me $150,000 a year. Now, this was in the 1970s, so that was big money, right? Fast forward to the movie Jerry Maguire. And the guy's on getting the interview with Roy Firestone. He starts crying. People don't know what $3.5 million, the kind of trouble it brings. And the stars of the movie are watching and going, are you kidding me? Everybody cries when they get on that show. Where are we now today, Dr. SAWLIS? Those are two examples, one from the 70s, one from the 90s, and it was treated with humor, but I think that's how people looked at things. Where are we in 2021?
I'm hopeful, and I'm going to take Brandon Marshall as a lead. I mean, he is supporting Project 375. I mean, he got fined on a Bear game for wearing green shoes to promote mental health. And so I'm hoping that athletes and student athletes, maybe they will be the agents of change to understand that when we take off the armor, whether that is an arm brace, a knee brace, or a helmet, that underneath we are human and that we are emotional beings. And if we're not emotional, that we can't, if we stifle that emotions, that we're going to stifle love and joy. And so I'm going to leave it with one last quote because I'm an English teacher. This is from Dr. Bruce Perry. The more healthy relationships a child has, the more likely he will be to recover from trauma and thrive. Relationships are the agents of change, and the most powerful therapy is human love. That's where we need to be in 2021, is to embrace human love.
That is so well said, and I'm going to help out here as we conclude and want to thank Dr. CARYN SAWLIS, want to thank Tina Robertson, Isaiah Woods, Michael Davis, Tim Brown, and everyone who joined on here tonight. And I'm looking at some of these comments, and Lisa Thomas, to everyone, love all of this. Cheryl Davila, love yourself, forgive yourself. You are not alone. Keep on keeping on. Thank you for this in all caps. Love is the answer. I think we're all looking for that love, looking for that community, looking for that village, looking for that support. So let's keep giving it to each other. Let's keep going out there finding it. And I thank you all for another wonderful webinar. Michael, keep doing them, and I'll keep trying to help in my small way. But all of you are the ones doing all the great stuff. Thank you all very much. Good night, and we'll see you the next time out.